It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Matt Lesser, founder and CEO of Uniquely Normal. Uniquely Normal exists to equip and train leaders to build flourishing team members and organizations through empathy, empowerment, and excellence. And Matt has had the honor of training leaders, teams, and boards in over 40 countries over the past 20 years. Prior to launching Uniquely Normal, Matt served in C-suite roles in private equity, banking, and industrial supply and distribution, and he spent the first 15 years of his career leading his family's business in the petroleum industry. Matt earned his undergraduate degree in business from Indiana University and an MBA from Taylor University. He's a best-selling author, and his first book, Unsatisfied When Less Is More, and his second book will be released in late 2023. Matt's greatest treasures are his faith, family, and friends, and he resides in Northeast Indiana with his family. Matt Lesser, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you so much, Brand. I've been looking forward to our conversation today.
I have as well, and great to connect with you. Now, are you in the part of the country this week that's still getting snow and cold, or is it warming up where you are today?
So we had some snow activity over the weekend, but today it's a sunny day. It's windy, but it's chilly still.
Always this time of year, can't decide whether it's spring or winter, but hopefully it'll come soon.
Yes, amen to that.
Well, listen, what we will always like to try to start our podcast with is the early years and talking a little bit about the CEOs, where they grew up. Tell us a little bit about that, what part of the country and what your early family life was like.
No, glad to. So I grew up in a little lake community, actually, in Northeast Indiana. Population, I think, of 700. No stoplight.
Small
There was
town.
a four-way stop.
A small town.
Yes,
Nice.
very small. But like I said, I grew up on a lake, and so my childhood was a lot of time on the water, and
Nice.
so I loved that, and so that was a lot of fun. We moved here originally, so I moved here. I think I was 4 when we moved here. I have very little memory before that. But we moved here actually because my dad bought into a business. He bought into a wholesale oil distribution business. That focused primarily on like gasoline, diesel fuel, those kinds of oils, if you will.
Right.
So that's what brought us here. And so then, literally the second year we were here, he bought his partner completely out. So he bought half the first year and the second half the second year. It was just a little unexpected, but that's what happened.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so my childhood was a lot of, when you have a family business, unless you're extremely intentional about it, it permeates everything. And so
Everybody's involved. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Everybody's involved. Every dinner, holiday, we might talk a little bit about other things and stuff, if you will, but it almost always gravitates towards business. And
Yeah. Right.
that's just the way it is. So
Was
um,
mom involved in the business as well?
she was not, let me put it this way. She was off and on, but I'm the oldest of 3 boys. And so,
Okay.
so she was primarily focused on us, and just so grateful that, that we were able to have mom available to us, full time primarily. And,
Yeah.
dad worked, he worked a ton. And so he wasn't really around all that much, but, mom was almost always here. So that was really nice.
What were some of the early influencing moments that you can remember from mom or dad or others during those early years?
Yeah, great question. So my mom and her parents, so my maternal grandparents, they're the ones that had a tremendous impact on my upbringing. I've
Mm,
often said that a lot of who I am today is a direct result of their influence in my life,
wow.
from my belief system, from my values. Now, and so that's what they just took the time to talk with me, to invest in me. Some of my fondest memories are with those three, and so
Wow.
I mean,
Nice.
I could take the entire time we have here just talking about that
Yeah.
alone. But they're amazing people, and
What were
when
some of the things they poured into you? What do you remember from those days, those early days?
so my grandfather was he was a perpetual entrepreneur. So he just
Yeah.
loved business, and so he's the one who really poured into me about business practices, financial
Mm,
practices. He's the one who taught me the importance of saving, of living below your means, I'll never forget. I was probably, I don't know, 17, 18, and I was down in Florida. They spent 6 months of the year in Indiana and 6 months in Florida. And I'll let you decide which 6 months those were. They were the 6 months that we all went. So, so, but every winter, my mom would literally take me and my brothers out of school for 2 weeks on either side of spring break. So we'd always have 3 weeks with them in Florida. And so I was probably my junior year, I guess, and I was down there. And when one morning I got up early, and my grandpa was always an early riser, and he was working on his budget for the year. And so I
right.
started asking questions, and he literally put that aside, and he taught me how to make a budget. And nobody had done that
Wow.
before. And
Yeah.
that had so it's just those kinds of things, Brand. That's just one concrete example. I could give you 50 of them, but that was just one thing that stuck out with me with him.
That's
So
great. I love
yeah,
it. Were you a good student in school, Matt?
I was. School came easy to me,
Yeah.
and so it was. Which actually gave me false confidence when I went into business for
Mm.
myself, because academics did come so easy. I love learning, love studying, and so yeah, so that it translated into it translated into some hard times starting out in the professional world.
Good. Well, I want to hit on that when we get a little later in the podcast. That sounds
Okay.
like an interesting transition there. What about
Yeah.
other activities? You involved in sports, music, theater,
So I was
museum?
involved in primarily sports. Did some theater in high school. No, I'm sorry. That was middle school. Middle school, high school. I focused on soccer and basketball and golf, actually. So those were
Right.
my three sports in high school, and now I just do whatever I can to stay in shape.
At
So
least once a day, right? To get out
exactly,
there and do
yeah,
something, moving around.
yeah.
With your dad an entrepreneur buying a business and obviously your maternal grandfather as well. What kind of any entrepreneurial things did you do when you were young? Did you have the ubiquitous paper route or selling Christmas cards? What kinds of things were you involved with?
So I had for my own self every summer I had a lawn mowing, I guess call it business, but I went around to
Sure.
neighbors and different businesses, both in the town I lived and in the town where the business is or was. It was about a half an hour away, and so I would spend my summers mowing people's lawns, to make some extra money. So I did
Right.
that. But as I got older, my summers were primarily dedicated to working in the business, which meant I got all the grunt jobs. So sweeping the warehouse floor, um,
Right.
working on leaks in the roof. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so that was my childhood primarily.
Did you get a little more than room and board for that and get some spending money in the pocket as well?
I did. Never paid minimum wage, but we won't say anything about child labor. So,
For family businesses, yeah, that's a hard road to
it is, yeah.
hoe.
Always paid in cash, so there's no proof.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. I love it. Now, I knew you grew up or became a Christian at some point. Would God play a role in the early part of your life?
Yes, core role. So
Yeah.
I gave my life to Christ when I was 4, and
Wow,
but I
that's
really
young.
it was young. And my mom and her parents played a crucial role in that. But Brant, I wouldn't say that I accepted my faith as my own until I
Yeah.
was 15, and
Right.
going
Right.
into my freshman year. of high school, I came down with a very rare blood disease, and I spent the better
Oh,
part of
wow.
a year in the hospital. Missed my I had to be basically homeschooled my freshman year because I wasn't allowed to
Wow.
leave. I wasn't allowed to do anything. It was one of those that my body attacked itself, and I had very little
Gosh.
platelets, and so
Wow.
I had weekly treatments, and it was and those treatments made me very ill. And so it was about halfway through that experience. It lasted almost a year on the nose. It was really odd.
Mm.
About halfway through, I was in the hospital, and it was about 2 a.m. I was alone. My parents had actually gone home that night to sleep in their bed, and crawling back into bed from, I won't give you the gory details, but being sick. And
Yeah.
I had this thought, and I know it was of God, and it went something like this. Here I am. I'm angry because I was ticked off. I mean, I had worked my butt
Yeah.
off, Brand. I mean, I was an overweight, out of shape kid most of my childhood.
Mm.
But I
Mm.
started playing soccer in seventh grade, and I was actually pretty good at it. And so that motivated me to get in shape, to work on my skills. And going into my freshman year, I was good enough that I was probably going to be the starting goalie on the varsity.
Wow.
And so now here I was, I couldn't even play. And so I couldn't go to school, I couldn't be with my friends, I couldn't do anything. And I was just ticked off. And quite frankly, I was
Yeah.
ticked at God. And so as I'm crawling back into bed, this thought hits me. It's like, here I am. I'm sick. I can't do anything about it. And I'm ticked off at the one person that can actually do something about it. A 15-year-old, and I'm having this thought, and literally I said, okay, God, you know what? I'm done being angry because you're the great healer. So you can choose to heal me if you want to. And if not, I accept it. And so
Yeah.
I rededicated my life to him that night, but it was about, like I said,
Wow.
2 a.m. and got a great night's sleep. But from then forward, people ask me, were you healed? I wasn't healed physically, but
Mm.
I was healed spiritually, emotionally,
Yeah.
and all kinds of other ways. So I really view that as my spiritual birth date, if you will.
Right, right. Cool. Super cool. Yeah, I had kind of a similar experience. I was going to the church when I, grew up and Sunday school and so forth. But it was 15 years old at a family camp when I accepted the
Wow.
Lord. And there's something about, I think, kind of being that age too, where you have
Yeah.
to kind of decide, are you going to run with the pack,
Yep.
and be like everyone else, or really kind of find a way to distinguish yourself. And, obviously in the situation you were in, I think that's just magic that you were able to turn to Him. And did you get through the blood disorder over time? Is that something that you were able to heal and cure, or is it still something you deal with?
So it about 6 months after that night. So like I said, almost about a year to the nose, on the nose. I had a treatment, and rather than my platelet count going down, it maintained, and it actually started to go up.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so
Fabulous.
to this day, I still have to have annual blood tests.
Yeah.
My platelet count is not normal, so it's consistently 10 to 30% below the bottom of what's considered normal.
Right.
But it's not at a level that I have to have treatment. But interestingly enough, last year I was diagnosed with a very rare immunodeficiency disorder, or
Mm.
disorder, whatever we call it, that requires weekly treatments again, weekly infusions. But so it is related to that, but it's a completely different animal. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, prayers are for you.
thank you very much.
So I got that. So Indiana University went to Fort Wayne. Tell us a little bit about that decision. Was it kind of a foregone conclusion? You're the oldest of all the boys there.
Yep.
Did mom and dad go to college, and was that expected of you, or a decision you made on your own?
No, actually, they met at Taylor University. So
Okay, got it. Yeah.
my dad was studying ministry, and my mom was studying elementary ed, and so they met there, and then they got married after college, and then my dad went to grad school at Trinity Theological, and then decided he was almost finished and decided that he wanted to be in business instead. So that's what he did. So yes, I mean, it was one of those things, Brant, that growing up, I really never knew there was any option other than going to college.
Right, right,
It
right.
was expected from the time I was little, and so I always had my eyes set on Taylor as well. And when it came time to go, just we were in a position financially and as a family where it just didn't make much sense. and there's other factors involved as well. And so I decided to go to Indiana, but chose to go to the Fort Wayne campus for many reasons. But one of them was financial. It's a decision that honestly I'm glad I made. I look back on
Yeah.
I feel like I got a great education. Some of my professors were practitioners as well. I really appreciate to this day their wisdom they shared. So it was, I had a great experience.
Well, then you made it to Taylor later, right? You went there
I
for your
did.
MBA.
Yeah.
So you
Finally
got a
got to
double
go.
dip.
Yeah. So yeah. In fact, when it came
That's
time that
awesome.
I was going to get my MBA, I explored many different programs. But Taylor had a program where it was a hybrid model of in person and online, and it was cohort based, and it had an
Oh,
international
nice.
component to it that I wanted. So kind of checked all the boxes. And yes, I did want to go to Taylor anyway. So it helped check that box too.
Perfect. I love it. What was the first job you took out of Indiana?
So I actually worked through college, I worked in a quick lube.
All right.
That's where I cut my teeth, and it kept me motivated to finish college because I did not want to work my career in a quick lube. And so then after college, I explored a couple of different opportunities. Actually, with my dad, we thought about launching a couple of different businesses.
Hmm.
They didn't pan out. And so then, about 6 months after I graduated, I came into the family business full time. And I had worked off and on through college as well, primarily the summers. So I'd work in the quick lube during school, and I'd work in the family business during the summer. And
Right.
so I came into it. And honestly, that's not what I had planned to do. I had planned to go to grad school and kind of figure out a different plan. And that's where uh, after about a year after that, then is when everything got really interesting. So
All right. Well, let's hear about that.
okay, fine. Um, so my dad and I just didn't necessarily see eye to eye on a lot, and so about 2 years after I came into the business, I I just knew it wasn't working. So at that point, I was newly married my elementary school sweetheart. Actually, we met. I was in
Wow.
third grade; she was in fourth grade. And so I went into my dad then. So I graduated college in '95, and in mid '97, I went into my dad's office. My dad played football, big guy, and I just said, Dad, I said, this isn't working. One of us needs to go, and I'm guessing it's not going to be you because you own the stock.
All right.
So I said, I'm leaving, and I'm going to go to grad school. And he said, sit down. And so I sat down, and he said, actually, I'm leaving, and he meant it.
Oh my
And
gosh.
yeah,
Wow.
he divorced my mom. They've been married for 29 years,
Oh
and he
wow.
moved 1,500 miles away, and he literally signed the business over to me on the way out the door. That should have been a
Wow.
red flag.
Yeah.
It wasn't,
Yeah.
because, as I
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, my success in academics had given me this false confidence that, well, if school went easy, it was easy for me. After
Yeah.
all,
I
I
can fix
studied
anything.
business in
Yeah.
school.
Right.
I
Right.
thought everything else should too. And Brant, it was one thing after another that
Hmm.
I began to uncover and discover. And 3 months after taking over the business, I was facing certain failure,
Oh my
and
gosh. Wow.
I began to not sleep. I didn't know any of this terminology then, but I began to not sleep. I had very bad anxiety that turned into panic attacks,
Mm.
multiple per day, and literally to the point that I would vomit. Um, and that led to then about 3 or 4 months after that, not being able to get out of bed or not wanting to get
Oh
out
my
of bed.
gosh.
And so,
This depression
yes,
set in, I guess, right on top of that. Yeah.
exactly.
Wow. Tough.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, so I was able to, I guess, kind of gut it through the holidays, and then in late January, early February of this would have been '98 now. The way I describe it, Brant, is I felt like it was in this dark hole with no way out, super slick
Mm.
sides, no light, no way out, no hope, and I felt helpless and hopeless. And I
Mm.
came to the decision that it was time to end my life. And
Wow.
uh,
Wow.
and so that's the point I came to, and so it would have been early February. I actually slept really well that night. I hadn't slept in months at that point, and I'm not exaggerating. I just didn't sleep. And I slept and I woke up the next day and I showered. I actually went to my office. I mean, for probably 2.5 months, 3 months, I literally would get up and I would, if I went anywhere, I would just go sit in a park in my truck all day, because
Mm,
I couldn't go to the office. I just couldn't face life.
mm,
And so I woke up that day and I showered and I went into the office actually, which people were kind of shocked to see me. I pulled out three pieces of paper. I was going to write three letters, one to my wife, one to my mom, who I had hired to work for me, and one to my little brother. My middle brother
mm,
went with my dad when he moved to Florida. And so I, not one word ever got written. It
mm,
was just from that point forward is one miracle after another. Before I started to write, I had this fleeting thought that I knew my parents had taken out a life insurance policy on me when I was little, but I knew nothing about it. Rather than calling the agent, who was a dear friend of my mom's, I drove 3 blocks to his office. To this day, I
mm.
don't know why I did that other than God. I walked into his office. He happened to be in. We spent 15 minutes together, if that. I left, came back to my office. By the time I got back to the office, my mom was waiting for me at the door and said, "Hey, let's go have tea," which was not
Mhm.
unusual. We would do that. And she said, "I'll drive." And that's what I knew. I should have known something was up, because I always drove. And so we went. She took me then to this local businessman, very successful, who went through something very similar a decade prior. Come to find out,
Mm.
as soon as I left my life insurance agent's office, he picked up the phone and he called my mom. And yep,
Your son just showed up, and that was pretty unusual. I'm sure
yeah,
that how the conversation went. Yeah.
it was. Well,
Yeah.
actually, what he said is, he says, "I just saw your son." He says, "I know things are a mess. I know you guys are trying to get
Yeah.
through, all this." He says, "I just saw your son, and if you don't do something today, he will not be here tomorrow." And
Mm.
so
Wow.
she hung up the phone
Wow.
and she called the only other person she could think of that went through this, and that was the person she took me to see. So,
Wow.
so we spent 6 hours with him. At the end of that time, he never said, "I'll fix it. I'll take care of it. You don't have to worry." All he said was, "I will walk with you through this," and that is
Mm.
exactly what he did.
Wow.
So,
Fabulous. Right. And he was an
yep,
older man, I presume, or
yep,
someone that had kind of gone through the backside. Wow.
yep,
Wow.
yep,
Terrific. Well,
yep.
then what happened with the business? Did you end up selling it or transition that on? And how did you get into your next step?
Yeah. So from that point forward, we had to transition it. There was not he brought a team. I was taken out for a while. I had to get medicated. I had to get help, and
Yeah.
so I was sidelined for I think it was 6 to 9 months. Can't remember exactly, but so while I was gone, he brought in a team of people to basically see, what do we have. Well, it just so happened my mom was untouched because everything was transferred to me. So one of the biggest issues were we had two big issues. One was we had polluted properties because we were in the oil business, and then those polluting properties were polluting neighboring properties. So the EPA doesn't like
Mm.
that too much. The big one is that my withholding tax wasn't paid for a year.
Mm.
That will get you in really deep water with the IRS.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah. They
and
don't like that
so,
at all.
no, not at all. So what happened but what they discovered is that we had enough other assets to start over. So this businessman, and what I should call him friend, friend, he gave us a loan to pay off the IRS, and we
Mm.
we we started a new business, and it from the first month forward, it was profitable, which was
Wow.
interesting because the prior business struggled for years to make money. and
Yeah.
uh, and from there it just took off. It grew. There was three of us when it started over. There was me, my mom, and one other gentleman that worked for both my dad and me combined for 35 years.
Mm.
And by the time we finally did sell it 10 years later, and by the time we sold it, it had grown immensely. I mean, we had 180 lives, we had multiple locations, we had gotten into retail as in addition to wholesale, and it was just an unbelievable experience. I was at the point where I really wanted to try something else, and the business had grown to a point where we were no longer considered little, but we were not playing at the next level as our biggest competitors.
Right.
And so to get to that next level would have required substantial investment and substantial risk. And we just had too many lives to take that risk, basically, for my ego.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we believed in we had a very relational approach to everything we did: customers, suppliers, competitors even. And so we went to two of our larger competitors, and they both expressed interest. We wound up selling to one of them in 2007, and that's when I joined actually my friend that helped us restart. Um, so
Okay.
I joined him in private equity.
Wow.
And that's,
And was that Ambassador Enterprises? Was that the next
yep,
opportunity that came along? Or was it?
it,
Yeah,
it
fantastic.
sure
Tell us a
is.
little bit about that because you went into senior leadership there.
I did, yeah. So when I joined, it was he was still in the process of liquidating his major holding. He was in the steel business, and so for the first year or two, we didn't do a whole lot. We just kind of got ready to get ready. So we built a lot of processes, we built a lot of training constructs, and we built our processes for M&A.
Mm.
After the divestiture of the major holding, then shortly after that is you know what happened in 2008. So we didn't do a
Oh
whole
yeah.
lot. We sat on we
Right.
basically kept the powder dry.
Yeah.
And in 2010, then we really started to ramp up the mergers and acquisitions engine. And
Yeah.
so I was in the basically I was in the COO role, co-COO with a good friend of mine. So we ran the operations of Ambassador for several years, and then after that, I really enjoyed being in the field. I enjoyed
Yeah.
meeting people, working with leaders, and so I spent several years then literally traveling the globe, looking for investment opportunities, meeting with leaders,
Mm.
meeting with most of them were family-owned businesses. Um, and then my final 2.5, 3 years with Ambassador, then I was strictly in leadership development. Um,
Right.
so so that was kind of my progress through Ambassador.
How was that transition for you? Going from, running an oil distribution company, obviously very specific industrial role, to more of that leadership development type of position. Was that a tough change for you?
The biggest change was the first year in
Yeah.
going from basically having a lot of autonomy and a lot of and going from something that I knew like the back of my hand.
Right.
Literally had grown up in it, so to then having to learn something completely new, and
Yeah.
go into something a whole lot more structured. And so that was the biggest hurdle for me to get over. Transitioning from operations then to investment and then into leadership development, those were more natural transitions because I was kind of doing that anyway. So it was the first transition that was the hardest.
Right. I can imagine. Now, was Wildman one of the investments that Ambassador made? Is that how you transition to that role?
No, actually, it was not. I was on the board there, so I met the CEO owner of Wildman. That's a third generation company. I met him at an event that I was invited to, and I had heard his name for a while, wanted to meet him. We became fast friends. We went out for coffee after this meeting. I was asking about his company, asking what he did, and he was sharing a couple things with me. I shared a couple things back, and that led into a more of a coaching relationship. And then I
Mm.
became part of his board, and so it was from that board position that I then joined the company at the executive level for just over a year. But it was never intended, I guess, to be a long-term position because my desire
Right.
was to start my own company.
Yeah. Got it. Got it. And when did you know you wanted to do that? Start your own company?
So I started toying with the idea actually the last couple of years I was with Ambassador. It's one of those things, Brant, that I had people telling me more and more that like, man, you should go out and do this on your own. And
Mm.
so I guess I joke and say, I guess I heard it one too many times and I actually believed it. So
Sometimes that happens.
yeah, it does. So after Ambassador, I was going to do it then. Instead, I was actually doing some consulting work, some leadership development and board development work for a local bank, and they found out that was leaving Ambassador. Rather than just being a consultant to them, they offered me a role there. It was one of those that my wife basically said, I really don't think you should do that. I think you should stay as a consultant. And I failed to listen to my wife. So big lesson
Mm.
right there. And I did it. And honestly, by the end of the first week, I realized I'd made a mistake.
Mm,
So I
mhm.
gutted through it for about
Yeah.
11 months, and then um, I made the decision to move on.
And you started Uniquely Normal right in the middle of the pandemic. That's
I
a
did.
pretty brave direction. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that. Tell us more about the company and what you do,
Yeah.
and where you headed now.
Yeah. So after that, then I formed the company, and right in the middle of COVID, very difficult to get clients when you can't meet face to face. But so what it is, I started writing. My last few years at Ambassador, I was meeting with leaders, and I guess that most of them were family businesses, and I kept hearing the story. I didn't hear it once, twice, three times. I heard it 100 times, and
Mm,
the story went something like this, Brant. It went, I can't believe. Usually most of them were men. There were a handful of women, but most of them were men, mid 50s to mid 60s, and they would say, I can't believe that I sacrificed all this. And by this, they meant usually their marriage. If they were still
mm,
married, oftentimes they like live separate lives. Their kids, here I am. I'm finally at a point where this business has grown. I have time, I have money, I have this, and my kids don't want anything to do with me because I
mm.
wasn't there for them growing up. And
Yeah.
that conversation would end by saying, if I knew back then what I know now, I would have done this completely differently because I
Mm,
focused on the wrong things.
mm,
And I heard that over and over and over again. And so what that did in me, and I just kept taking notes and of my conversations, and so finally, and I was getting to a point where I was being asked some of those same questions. My kids were getting older, and I was gone a lot, and so I began just like I said, keeping track of my conversations. That led to this idea of, okay, these are all by societal standards, they're at the top, right? They're thriving, they're making money, they have cars, they have
right.
houses, they can take whatever vacation they want, blah, 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 blah. So by the world's definition, they had arrived, but yet they're miserable. They were not
Mm,
satisfied. And
mm,
um, and so it's like, okay, so if thriving isn't it, what is? And I had a catalytic conversation with a good friend of mine, and he used the word flourishing. I don't even remember what context. Um,
mm,
I love the word, and so I did a word study on it and fell in love with it. And so I said, that's it. Beyond thriving is flourishing. And
mhm,
whereas thriving, if you look up the definition, thriving is all about focusing in on me. It's accumulation of wealth, power, possessions, whatever. Flourishing is a focusing on giving back, on focusing outward, focusing on
mm.
legacy, being a part of something that's bigger than me.
Yeah.
And so that was it. So I started writing a book during the pandemic, and it turned into a book called Unsatisfied: When Less Is More. It was released last October, and so I couldn't necessarily get face to face with clients, so I wrote. And I wrote and I wrote, and then at the same time, then I worked with my friend at Wildman to help him build an executive team. Finished when I left there. Then I took 6 months to finish the book, and then went through the editing process. And then after the book came out, then is really when I really started to focus on client engagement, client acquisition, Brant, with Uniquely
Mm,
Normal.
yeah. Great. And how big the organization today? Are you still single shingle, or have you been able to hire employees and growing in that direction?
Growing, still flying solo.
Yeah.
Hopefully in the next, I'd love to be able to hire somebody within the next year, but a lot depends on what happens with client activity. My second book comes out later this year, so you never know what that might do. But yeah, still gotten it solo.
And consulting mostly with CEOs, family businesses. Who's your target? Who's the benefiting the most from your services these days?
It's mostly family businesses, and I think a lot of that
Hmm.
is because I grew up in one, I ran one, and that's who I've primarily, even in private equity, it was a family office. And
Yeah.
so I understand that. And I'd say the target is, I've worked with businesses as big as 150 million in revenue, and as little as, not even a million.
Yeah.
And everything in between.
What do you think's kind of the common thread of successful family businesses? Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's a great question. It depends on how you define success. And so, I think that from my perspective of success is that you're running a profitable business, because if you're not profitable, you won't be a business much longer. So
Right.
you have a profitable business that is intentional about integrating their values into their day-to-day practices. And businesses that have and CEOs and businesses that have a core commitment to faith,
Thank
to
you, Brent.
God, they're actually practicing those values. They aren't just aspired to. And I'm also a big fan that, I believe that organizations are people, and people are organizations. And so we need to treat people with the dignity, the respect that they, quite frankly, they deserve for just being human. And that means investing appropriately into team members. That means helping them become the best version possible of themselves. Everybody has dreams, and everybody has aspirations in life, and everybody has concerns as well. And so, how do we invest in our people, even if that means if I help this team member, get a degree, for example, there may or may not I may or may not have a place for them after that, and I need to be okay with that and celebrate it anyway.
Yeah.
So that's just I guess a concrete example. So
Yeah. No, I love that. Well, it's biblical, right?
yeah.
Treating others the way that we want to be treated.
Hmm.
Pretty simple when you boil down to it.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, we're just about out of time, but we always ask one last question of all our CEO guests, and that's kind of what career and life advice would you give to someone who maybe has their eyes on their own corner office someday, or maybe like you wants to be an entrepreneur and set up their own business?
Um, Pursue life with intentionality. Don't live it on
Mm,
accident. And if you have a
yeah.
desire to start your own thing or pursue the corner office, just take time to reflect on where do you sit. Ask yourself four basic questions. What am I passionate about? What am I really good at doing? How do I contribute value? And then a fourth one is, what is my calling? What is it that
Mm,
I just can't not do in life? And I believe that
right.
the intersection of those four is the beginning of living a flourishing life.
Wow. Matt Lesser, founder and CEO of Uniquely Normal, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thank you, Brent.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.